born in the land of riches, gold, oil, diamond bright. But our streets are stained with blood, but the youth fight for their rights. Protesting for a future, yet they're slaughtered in the night. While the leaders sit in silence, flying private jets in flight. They drive their bulletproof cars while we walk these streets. Say there's no money, but their jets fly with ease. Our children starve, but they're too blind to see. Muguland, why can't we be free? Muguland, Muguland. We're crying out for change, but they shoot us on the streets. Muguland, Muguland. We have all it takes to be great, but only corruption is great in the land. They say no money's left, but the rich keep getting fat. Their wrists shine with diamonds, private jets, imagine that.
The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the bustling streets of Alaye city. As darkness crept across the metropolis, the familiar symphony of honking horns and street vendors' calls was shattered by the sharp, menacing sound of gunfire. The echoes reverberated through the narrow alleys and wide boulevards, a chilling sign that something terrible had happened. Meanwhile, in the affluent neighborhood of Kokuyi, far from the chaos of the streets, a group of powerful men gathered around a massive mahogany table in a luxurious mansion. These were the Kingmakers of Muguland, the shadowy figures who pulled the strings of the nation's political machinery. Tonight, they had convened to decide the fate of one of their own. At the head of the table sat Chief Bisola Elenian, a man whose ascent to power had been as swift as it was mysterious. His thick-framed glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, obscuring eyes that many believed could see straight into a man's soul. The tension in the room was palpable, each man's face a mask of steely resolve, but their eyes betrayed the fear that lurked just beneath the surface. The only sound was the occasional click of a lighter as someone lit a cigarette, adding to the haze of smoke that hung in the air. Suddenly, the double doors at the far end of the room burst open, and a man staggered in, clutching his side. Blood seeped through his fingers, staining the rumpled white of his shirt. The men at the table leapt to their feet, their chairs scraping loudly against the polished marble floor.
"Bogunlo is dead," the man gasped before collapsing to the ground.
A collective gasp filled the room as people absorbed the shocking news that Williams Bogunlo, the charismatic politician who had once posed a serious threat to Chief Bisola Elenian's carefully constructed empire, was dead. The implications were as clear as the blood now pooling around the fallen man. Chief Bisola Elenian remained seated, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he rose to his feet, his gaze sweeping across the shocked faces of the men who had, until moments ago, considered themselves untouchable.
It begins, the price of power.
As the men exchanged glances, one of the bolder members of the group finally spoke up.
Chief, did you order this?
Elenian's eyes narrowed.
You think I would do something so reckless? This wasn't my doing. I need to know who did this. Find out now.
Chief Elenian's expression turned somber as he sat back down, contemplating the implications. He knew people would blame him. They always did. After all, Bogunlo was his biggest rival. But Elenian genuinely had nothing to do with this. Yet he also knew that bearing the weight of such accusations was part of the price of power, and he was prepared to pay it. Elenian's expression remained inscrutable, but a flicker of something, sadness perhaps, passed through his eyes. He knew that no matter what he said, no matter how he protested his innocence, the blame would fall on him. Bogunlo was his biggest rival, and in the eyes of the people, that made him the prime suspect. As his people kept looking at each other in shock and confusion at the unexpected development, Chief Elenian sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. He knew that in the world of Mugulandian politics, truth was often irrelevant. Perception was everything, and the perception now was that he was a killer. It was an accusation he would have to weather, a storm he would have to endure. He had chosen this path, and he was prepared to face its consequences. Outside, Alaye city roared in response to the news. Protests erupted spontaneously as rumors of Bogunlo's assassination spread like wildfire. The streets were flooded with people demanding justice, their cries echoing off the walls of the city that had given birth to so many broken dreams.
Justice for Bogunlo. We demand justice.
But above the chaos, like a shadow looming over the land, was the figure of Chief Bisola Elenian, a man who had mastered the art of political survival and who knew that tonight was just the opening move in a much larger, bloodier game. As night fell, Chief Bisola Elenian returned to his seat, his fingers tapping a steady rhythm on the table. He had climbed too high, seen too much, to be afraid now.
My enemies will come for me, as they always have, but this time, I am ready. I will not just survive, I will dominate.
Outside, the gunfire continued, a stark reminder that in the world of Mugulandian politics, power was not simply earned, it was seized, manipulated, and often paid for in blood. And tonight, Chief Bisola Elenian was prepared to pay that price.
The rain pounded relentlessly against the tin roof of the small room in Mushin, a rhythmic drumming that seemed to mirror the chaotic thoughts racing through Dauda Omolomo's mind. He sat hunched over a weathered wooden table, staring intently at the worn passport in front of him. The photograph inside belonged to a young woman, her face framed by tight curls and her eyes wide with the innocence of youth. The name beside the picture read Bisola Elenian. Dauda's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears like a war drum. This was it, the moment that would change everything. The room felt smaller than usual, the walls closing in as the weight of his decision pressed down on him. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and desperation, mingling with the sharp tang of sweat that clung to his skin. He picked up the passport, his fingers trembling slightly. It was not fear that made him shake, but the gravity of what he was about to do. The path he was about to take was one from which there would be no return. But Dauda had long since resigned himself to the fact that the life he was born into could not be the life he lived. Not if he wanted to survive. Not if he wanted to thrive. His gaze drifted to the corner of the room, where a small shrine had been hastily erected. At its center was a photograph of the real Bisola Elenian, the daughter of his political mentor, Chief Musibao Elenian. She had been the apple of her father's eye, a bright and promising student with a future as luminous as the morning sun. But fate had other plans. A sudden and mysterious illness had struck her down in the prime of her life, leaving Chief Elenian devastated. It was in the aftermath of her death that Dauda had first conceived his audacious plan. He had been close to the chief, who had seen potential in the young man and taken him under his wing, but with Bisola gone, Dauda knew that his position was precarious. He needed a way out, a way to ensure his survival and to seize the opportunities that Alaye City could no longer offer him. She was too good for this world, Chief Elenian had once said, his voice thick with grief as he stared into the distance. She was going to change the world, Dauda, but now the world is a little darker without her. Dauda had nodded silently, offering what little comfort he could. But even as he did, his mind was working furiously, plotting a way to use the situation to his advantage. He saw an opportunity where others saw only tragedy. One night, as the chief lay drunk and weeping over the loss of his daughter, Dauda had quietly slipped into Bisola's room. There, among the remnants of her life, he found her passport. The resemblance was faint but unmistakable, enough to pass for siblings, perhaps even close family. With the right story, Dauda could make it work. And in that moment, Dauda Omolomo, an unremarkable man born in Yamoja City, in faraway Nuso State to unremarkable parents, died. And the legend of the man later to be known globally as Chief Bisola Elenian was born. He was no longer the son of a struggling market woman, doomed to a life of mediocrity. He was now the child of a respected political figure, a man with connections and influence, a man who could open doors that had always been slammed shut in Dauda's face. His decision made, Dauda Omolomo, now determined to legitimize himself as the reincarnated Bisola Elenian, had approached the chief with a plan. "Chief, I need your help," Dauda said, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his mind. "I want to honor Bisola's memory by continuing her education in the United States. I have been accepted into a program there, but I need your support to make it happen." Chief Elenian had looked at him with bleary eyes, clouded by both alcohol and grief. "You want to go in her place?" he had asked, his voice tinged with confusion. "Yes, Chief," Dauda had replied. I want to carry on her legacy, to fulfill the dreams she could not. I want to make you proud, just as she would have. The chief had stared at him for a long moment, and for a terrifying second, Bisola thought his plan had failed. But then the old man had nodded, a sad smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. She would have wanted that, Chief Elenian had whispered. She would have wanted you to succeed where she could not. And with that, Dauda had secured his passage out of Alaya City and into a new life as a man reborn, or more appropriately as a woman reborn, with the Bisola Elenian identity and the full permission of the man who had given his now deceased daughter that name. The documents were prepared, the funds transferred, and before long the new Bisola Elenian was boarding a plane bound for the United States. The city that had given him life had now given him a new identity, a new purpose, and a new path to power. As the plane took off, leaving Alaya City behind, Bisola leaned back in his seat, a small smile playing on his lips. The game had begun, and he was more than ready to play. "I will surely come back someday," he whispered to himself, the roar of the engines drowning out his words, "but not until I have everything to be somebody in this land." The clouds parted below, revealing the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. Beyond it lay the future he had stolen, the future he would make his own. In that moment, Bisola Elenian was no longer just a man. He was an idea, a force that would stop at nothing to claim what he believed was rightfully his. And nothing, not even the memory of the real Bisola Elenian, would stand in his way.
Born in the land of riches, gold, oil, diamond bright. But our streets are stained with blood, but the youth fight for their rights. Protesting for a future, yet they're slaughtered in the night. While the leaders sit in silence, flying private jets in flight. They drive their bulletproof cars while we walk these streets. Say there's no money, but their jets fly with ease. Our children starve, but they're too blind to see. Muguland, why can't we be free?